During the journey, Ahuru, the talking cactus, revealed that he had figured out what was troubling Estio. He mentioned that Estio struggled with refusing others and was overly obedient to their wishes. Ahura continued to speak, and Parker noticed Estio glancing at the cactus. Parker asked Estio what was bothering him, and Estio tried to brush it off by saying it was nothing. Ahura became a bit annoyed, and Estio told him to be quiet, to which Ahura reluctantly agreed. Parker inquired if Estio was talking to the plant, and after Estio confirmed, Parker praised Estio's ability and jokingly asked if he could read his mind as well. Estio remained silent, essentially implying he couldn't. Niju's sudden snoring startled Parker and sarcastically remarked in his mind that he could beaten. Estio confirmed that it was real. Parker realized that Estio was talking to him because of Niju's snoring and apologized, saying he had teased him enough and could stop reading his mind. Estio patted Niju on her shoulder and offered him a place to rest his head since they had a long journey ahead. Estio agreed, and as Parker observed them, they seemed like a close-knit group, almost like a family. The atmosphere became friendly, and at one point, Parker asked Estio if he felt cold and offered to adjust the carriage's temperature or provide a blanket. Estio declined, saying he was already comfortable, far more than when he lived in the attic. However, he did admit to missing Hawk's candies. As rain began to fall, the view from the carriage window, with the starry sky and snowy trees, became mesmerizing. Suddenly, Ahuru started acting silly and suggested it was the perfect time for ghost stories. Estio lightly touched him, thinking that humans were the ones who were truly scary. Parker began snoring, and Ahuru complained about the noise, saying that snoring through the mouth was the most irritating sound he could imagine. Niju woke up too, not because of snoring but because she sensed something swarming near the carriage. It wasn't human or ordinary animals. Then, a person from the front part of the carriage appeared, warning them about a horde of monsters that had completely surrounded them. Parker asked how many of them there were and if there was any chance of escaping. The person explained that the monsters were harpies, bird-like creatures with formidable combat capabilities. They talked about the monsters not showing up until winter, and one guy mentioned that even if they tried to escape, it would be tough to outrun them because they were faster than the horses. Niju then decided to investigate and jumped out of the carriage, telling Estio to stay back. The carriage driver said it was sad to let their ally face the harpies alone, but Parker, who had no combat skills, expressed his fear. Estio offered to help, but Parker sensed something was off in Estio's demeanor. He thought Estio might intend to use him as bait for the harpies instead of fighting them. Parker decided to warn Estio about the harpies, emphasizing that they were savage creatures that hunted in groups and couldn't be defeated with sheer strength alone. While Niju tried to scare the harpies away, Parker warned that taking out a few of them wouldn't make much of a difference, and their best option was to run. Just then, a harpy flew straight at Parker, and he used his wings to shield himself. When he opened his eyes, he saw Estio standing in front of him, with a harpy's beak piercing his shoulder. The harpy was digging deeper into Estio's flesh, while the other harpies watched from above. The harpy screeched and tried to finish him off, but Niju swiftly punched the harpy in the face. She asked if Estio was okay, and he said he was fine. Parker, still in shock, apologized and thanked Estio for saving his life. Parker shouted that more harpies were approaching, and as they looked up, all the remaining birds flew straight at them. Estio remained calm and wondered if he could use his ability against multiple targets. He looked at the birds and calmly told them to stop. Just before their sharp claws could reach him, he ordered them to back off. The birds panicked and flew away as if they'd seen a monster. Parker was amazed and wondered if humans could control monsters. Estio turned to him and suggested they return to the carriage, so they did. As they stood in front of the carriage, Parker looked at the sky and realized how terrifying it was to see a human scare off the harpies. He finally understood why the headquarters had been desperately searching for Estio. Parker observed Estio being gentle with Niju, ensuring she was okay and had no injuries. Had thought that Estio's combination of extreme care and politeness, along with his terrifying abilities, made him even more dangerous. While sleeping in a carriage, Estio heard someone call him annoying. He opened his eyes and saw Suki complaining about his carelessness. She told him to get some rest instead of running around and risking encounters with monsters. Estio apologized, but Suki said there was no need to apologize if he avoided trouble in the first place. The morning arrived, and Estio noticed that Ahuru, the cactus, had taken his first steps and could now move independently. Niju was impressed and congratulated him, and they shared a small high five. They woke up Parker, who found their behavior quite unusual. Parker also thought it was stranger to scare away a group of harpies with just a word than seeing a walking cactus and a white-furred monkey as friends. He wondered what would come next, maybe a dragon. As he contemplated how cool it was to read and control hearts, Estio complimented Ahuru on his cool wings. The journey continued, and while having some bread, Estio asked Ahuru if he needed food or water. Ahuru explained that he had drunk some of Estio's blood when he was injured the previous night. Estio was a bit taken aback, thinking Ahuru was a bit strange. He picked up Ahuru, who explained that he hadn't done it on purpose. The blood accidentally landed on him, and he had bloomed for the first time. Parker was amazed by the idea of a regular plant drinking blood and becoming mobile. Ahuru then gave Estio a flower as a gift, but it suddenly burned into ashes and disappeared. Ahuru suddenly freaked out and warned Estio about a light on his shoulder. Estio removed his bandages and found that the flower had healing properties and had healed his wound. Ahuru flexed his muscles, impressed. Estio asked Niju if Suki had visited them the previous night, half thinking he might have been hallucinating. Niju confirmed that Suki had been with them since the previous night. Estio spotted Suki on the carriage's roof and invited her inside, as it was dangerous to lie on the roof. Parker asked if Suki was Estio's cat, but Estio explained that Suki was a cat with an owner, not a stray cat. Parker realized that Suki was a friend. Suki had asked about Parker's injury, and Estio had explained. Ahuru had assisted in his healing. When Suki inquired about what a small cactus like Ahuru could do, Estio explained that he possessed a healing ability. He suggested to Suki that if she was planning to follow him, she might consider joining him. However, Suki had firmly stated that she wasn't following anyone. But it just so happened that she saw him injured while she was traveling. While petting and caressing her, Suki had felt goosebumps and remembered how Estio had hugged and warmed her up when they first met. She then changed her mind and decided to go with him, solely because he had asked her to. Estio had thanked her, and she thought he had changed for the better. A few minutes later, they arrived at a place with a portal that connected to the headquarters. Parker had taken care of the paperwork, and a person at the reception desk told them that the portal could be used 3 times a day per adult. He mentioned there might be some side effects after using the portal, and if they agreed Tahoe's conditions, the entrance would open. A few minutes later, Estio entered the purple portal and found himself in the Ignis Guild headquarters. The place was enormous and beautiful. They started walking on endless staircases, and Estio called help but felt like he was ascending to heaven. He wondered if heaven was a place filled with powerful and wealthy people and those who supported them. Finally, they reached their destination. Parker explained that the staircase was magical, much like the portal. He informed Estio that he was supposed to meet the guild master, but since they had been absent for about 3 months, he would be meeting the vice guild master instead. They stood in front of beautiful white doors, ready to enter the room. Parker rang the doorbell, but after waiting for some time, it became clear that the vice guild master was asleep. Parker continued to ring the bell as fast as he could, and the door finally opened. The drowsy vice guild master emerged and asked them to knock. He looked at Parker and jokingly mentioned that he didn't remember ordering chicken from food services. Parker, clearly irritated, told him he didn't bring food and that he had brought a guest. The vice guild master asked whose guest it was and stated that entertaining guests was not his job. He threatened to deduct Parker's pay for waking him up from his deep slumber. Just as he was about to go back into his room, the vice guild master noticed Suki and tried to pet her. Parker then introduced Estio, and the vice guild master realized that Estio was not just a regular guest but a leader of their guild. He introduced himself as Wen, shook Estio's hand, and expressed his happiness at finally meeting the rumored leader. Estio was left wondering why he was called a leader when they were invited into the Vice Guild Master's messy room. Niju thought the room looked like a pigsty, while Miju commented thatched step on things if she walked in. Wen assured them it was fine and then asked Niju if she was half human since she spoke soul. He went on to say that he wouldn't want to talk to humans so badly that he would learn how to speak if he were in her place. Estio immediately noticed that Wen was a very different person on the inside and outside. Wen offered coffee, and after Estio declined, he thought that Estio might not enjoy it due to its bitterness and offered cocoa instead. Estio thought to himself that he hadn't declined because of the bitterness. A minute later, there was coffee, cocoa, and various sweets on the table. Wen teased Estio about his age, but when Estio tried to defend himself by mentioning his coming-of-age ceremony, Wen argued that it proved his youth, as adults wouldn't report their age but instead be thankful. Parker spoke to Wen, telling him he sounded like a creepy old man who enjoys bothering kids, and suggested he should stop. Wen got serious and explained that the guild master decided to call the leader to the headquarters. Estio questioned why he was considered the leader, and the guild master clarified that it was also the guild master's decision. He was just delivering the message while holding a cup of cocoa. Estio wondered if the guild was a trustworthy place because of its secretive nature and constantly changing stance on things. On the other hand, they hadn't lied to him yet. Wen explained that from that moment on, Estio would be entrusted with special missions only the leader could carry out. He then handed Estio a bag containing a new guild uniform, a badge, supplies, and guild coins. Wen asked Estio to show off his powers, so Estio grabbed his sword and lunged at him. However, he stopped upon realizing that Estio hadn't moved an inch. Estio telepathically asked if that was enough. When realized Estio's skills were more advanced, he leaned back in his chair and said a new era had begun. The next day, Estio spent time with Uhuru, ensuring he had a comfortable vase with fresh soil. He appreciated the new bed and decorations but thought they didn't need to go to such lengths to make him comfortable. Niju opened a suitcase and found new clothes for Estio. There was a note indicating that the clothes had magical properties for cleaning, regulating temperature, and shock absorption. Estio offered to get clothes for Niju and Suki, but Suki declined, mentioning her fur. Neju commented that wearing nice clothes could earn better treatment, reflecting one's status. Estio was confused. He questioned the importance of status, thinking that even kings faced dislike from some people. Niju agreed but said having status could deter open attacks. Niju promised to protect Estio and warned that trouble could arise if stronger individuals harassed him. Estio decided to remove the metal collar from Niju's neck and reassured her that nobody would abuse them anymore. He mentioned that his abilities were getting stronger. He remembered that he had stopped a soldier from attacking him and scaring the birds away. But he started to think that maybe he had become a more selfish person than he thought. A couple of days passed, and Parker came with a letter for Estio. He remembered that he had stopped a soldier from attacking him and scaring the birds away. But he started to think that maybe he had become a more selfish person than he thought. A couple of days passed, and Parker came with a letter for Estio. Estio thanked him, and Parker said it wasn't a big deal because it was his job to deliver news and letters. Then he asked Estio if he had gotten used to the headquarters. Estio said he felt comfortable but was a bit bored because there was nothing to do. However, he was feeling a bit relieved now because of a new request that had come in. Parker praised Estio for his diligence but was invited by Estio to have a meal together. Estio thought that even though they called him a leader, he still wasn't sure about his role. He then read the request letter and saw that it was from someone named Mubian Hygar. Uhuru interrupted him and explained that the Hygars were one of the newest Duke families in the nation. The family head, Mubian, is the current emperor's cousin and an incredible body-type ability user. Estio asked if he had met Mubian, and Uhuru said he had, mentioning that Mubian had wide connections. Niju overheard their conversation and praised Uhuru for his knowledge, calling him a super cool cactus. Uhuru explained that Mubian was a bit eccentric, excelling in swordsmanship but not much else, Estio asked if Mubian was just strong, and Ahura said he was more than that. He had defeated the most skilled swordsman in the nation with a single strike and had even won against monsters. Nobody had ever defeated him. As Estio listened to Ahura's stories, he wondered why such a powerful person needed to ask for help from others. Then Parker brought their food, and they started eating. After they finished, Estio began thinking about the request and the lack of specific details. They decided to pick up their plates and leave, but Parker noticed that Estio seemed reserved. Estio, thinking about how badly his parents had treated him back home, realized why he had Bekamizo reserved. They walked down the hall, and Parker continuously followed him. Estio asked if Parker had more work to do at the headquarters. Parker wondered why Estio asked and explained that there were no more deliveries for a while, and the request he had given Estio was the last one. Estio asked if Parker was taking a break, but Parker said he was still working. They looked at each other awkwardly, each wondering why the other was acting strangely. Parker then revealed that he had been transferred to the leader support team from that day onwards, becoming Estio's direct subordinate. Parker had mentioned that he'd take care of things, but Estio, aware of Parker's recklessness, also said he'd be responsible. They agreed and shook hands. The protagonist suggested they pack up and visit a client named Mubian Hiker. Now we find Estio in front of a purple portal, with Parker standing behind him carrying a large backpack. Parker wondered if they should bring camping gear. Estio and Nija looked at him in disbelief, thinking he had lost his mind. Parker surprised them even more by pulling out some smelly, dirty snacks from his pocket, claiming they were limited edition crackers and cooked octopus baguettes that he bought with his monthly wage. He offered Estio the privilege of trying them first, but Estio politely declined, leaving Parker a bit disappointed. The portal receptionist then informed them that Hygar territory was beyond the portal's travel range. Instead, they had to go to Rennick's underground cave, a base halfway in that direction. Just as Parker started to object, the portal manager flipped the switch and wished them a pleasant journey. Estio entered first, followed by Niju and Suki, while Parker ran in last, pleading for them to wait. They arrived at the eerie underground cave, and Parker immediately began trembling with fear. Suddenly, a person with very few teeth in their head approached Parker from behind and chuckled oddly, causing Parker to scream in fright, jump, and hit the ceiling. He now lay on the floor, half conscious. The person introduced themselves as the portal manager. Estio asked if they were at Rennick's underground cave, and the portal manager recognized Estio's politeness. He explained that no one had visited the cave for a while and asked why a young person like Estio was going there. Estio explained their journey to Hygar territory, which surprised Rascal. In a serious tone, the portal manager mentioned that even fewer adventurers ventured into Hygar, which was known as the Land of Death. Estio inquired about the name, and Rascal shared a story about the emperor banishing his talented and good-looking cousin, followed by a history of royal family members killing each other. He pointed to the dark cave and mentioned that it was the only base connecting to Hygar, but nobody knew what was inside. Parker, confused, asked if there were monsters, and the portal manager confirmed that there were. He warned that the land bestowed to the Duke was filled with monsters, leaving Parker scared and hiding behind Estio. The portal manager looked at Estio and found it interesting that he saw a young man who wasn't scared or disturbed by the scary stories. He advised them to be careful and avoid drawing the Emperor's attention if they wanted to avoid trouble. Estio then told the portal manager to convey the same message to the king and let him know that he'd accept the king's welcome, so they could speak openly without hiding. Afterward, Estio and his crew entered a dark tunnel, while the portal manager laughed at Estio's threat to the king. He then transformed to look like our protagonist. Inside the tunnel, they were guided by some glowing balls. Estio and Niju proceeded calmly, but Parker was anxious, as he was an avian used to living in open spaces and flying. Estio understood his fear and explained that the cave was a direct route to the Hygar territory, which would save them time. They also had to wait a day before using a portal again. Parker accepted Estio's plan, acknowledging Estio as the leader. However, he assured Estio that he would follow his orders willingly. Estio considered it no different from controlling humans, but Parker mentioned that he had willingly joined the group because Estio had saved his life during a harpy attack. As they moved forward, Nija sensed many monsters deep in the tunnel. The crew was confronted by giant sandworms that suddenly erupted from the ground. Niju reassured them that the worms were gentle and wouldn't harm anyone if left alone. These worms were neither carnivorous nor herbivorous and mainly ate dirt. Estio and his crew continued, with Parker initially terrified but later relieved as the worms allowed them to pass without harm. The worms told him they had created the cave, and their emotions resembled the curiosity that humans often feel. Parker was on the other side, crying and unable to pass them. Estio tried to convince him to fly over the giant worms, but Parker wanted to conquer his fears. Eventually, he managed to cross to the other side. They continued their journey through the Renix underground cave, and Parker mentioned that many monsters attacked people in the cave, which was why nobody wanted to take that path. Despite the worms smelling bad and looking unusual, Parker found them to be friendly. He admitted being scared because they looked icky, and their appearance could make one think they were dangerous. As they discussed whether the worms were cute or icky, they realized they had been in the cave for about 3 hours. Parker complained about being dirty and suggested washing up in an herby pond. Niju mentioned she could smell clean water and hear a waterfall in the distance. Soon, they arrived at the end of the tunnel, which appeared magnificent. Exiting the tunnel crack, they discovered a beautiful waterfall inside the cave. Estio stood in awe in front of it, and the others joined him, amazed. Our protagonist touched the water and found it clean. Niju jumped into the pond, creating a big splash, and leaving Parker and Estio laughing. Parker suggested washing the cat, Suki, in the water to keep her from getting sick due to her dirtiness. Suki protested and called Parker a bird brain. She cautiously approached the water, but Parker suddenly lifted her and flew her above the pond. Suki looked terrified as Parker dove into the water, splashing everyone. After managing to escape Parker's grasp, Suki stood on his head and quickly leaped out of the water. Estio couldn't help but laugh, and Suki, still upset, called Parker a bird brain again and threatened not to let him get away with it. Estio explained that Suki was startled and asked Parker to apologize and promised not to do it again without her consent. Parker apologized and mentioned that he would have done it differently next time. He would have told her they were considering moving forward before allowing Ahuru and Suki, the cacti, to have a drink of water. Ahuru, thinking of something more satisfying than water, asked our protagonist if he could offer something better. Estio understood Ahuru's request, thinking that their diet might have changed. He wondered if they were originally a species of cactus that drinks blood. Estio asked Ahuru to extend his thorns and gently prick himself, then he fed the cactus. Parker was a bit concerned, but Estio assured him not to worry. Ahuru felt significantly better after sipping some blood, and they continued their journey. During their journey, they discussed the waterfall, wondering if it was naturally formed or made by humans. Parker suggested that it couldn't have been dug out by sandworms for public bathing, so it must have been created by some other great beings that inhabited the area before. Estio asked why he thought so, and Parker explained that caves like those usually had an owner, some even with tigers, wolves, and incredible dragons. This piqued Estio's curiosity, and he inquired about the dragons. Parker revealed that there were recent discoveries of dragon caves and shared an interesting fact about dragons having 2 physical forms, one with wings, a tail, and short 4 legs, and another as a regular human. These transformations occurred when dragons stopped using their unique abilities. Dragons could also appear in spiritual forms sometimes. Estio, who had never been to a temple, was intrigued, and Parker promised to take him to one, as all villages should have a place of worship. Estio wondered why dragons had gone extinct and been attacked if they were so loved by people. Parker explained that it was quite the opposite. The dragons, known as guardians, decided to leave the world due to the corrupted state of humanity and wars, not because they were killed. They abandoned the world, moving to a world of their own, as they didn't want to remain as guardians. Parker mentioned that this information came from the Holy Scripture, but he couldn't confirm its accuracy. Moments later, Niju warned Estio about approaching creatures, but these weren't friendly like the giant worms. Ferocious cave wolves were swarming towards them, hungry and aggressive. Parker got scared, and Niju indicated their hostility. The wolves attacked, and Niju fought them off. Estio intervened, calming the wolves with ease, choosing to spare their lives. He then told the wolves that he would be their leader from that point on. They all howled, showing their agreement. Estio signaled to his team that they should leave, and as they walked away, the wolves lay down on the ground, looking harmless like puppies. Parker mentioned to Niju that it was unfortunate she got dirty and bloody after washing in the pond, but Niju seemed happy to have helped. She assured her master she'd clean up again. Finally, they spotted the real exit of the tunnel, and walked out slowly. They arrived in Highgar, and Parker was captivated by the view in front of him. Highgar Castle was just a short distance away, and it looked beautiful with guards and cannons. The ground began to shake, and they noticed horseback riders approaching. They halted and asked Estio if he was the leader of the Ignis Guild, adding that the Lord was waiting for him. They entered the inner walls of Hagar's territory, and the people were amazed by Estio and Parker's appearance. The crowd started cheering and offered to join Estio if he ever needed help protecting the town. This made Estio emotional, as he never felt such a strong desire to protect the land he lived on. They entered the castle, and the guide explained that only the leader was allowed past that point. Others couldn't enter the office unless directly invited by the Duke. Estio said he'd be back soon, and Niju assured him that he could call for her if needed. Estio realized he'd never left those three alone in one place, and wondered if they'd get along. Suddenly, Ahura got away from Niju's grip. The Lord removed his glasses and greeted Estio, but was startled when he saw Ahura on the floor. Ahura shyly introduced himself telepathically, and the Lord screamed in fear. They continued screaming at each other, and the royal guard inquired if there was an issue. The Lord claimed everything was fine and turned to Ahura, calling him a cactus. Ahura responded by calling him an idiot. Estio took a step forward and identified himself as the guild leader. The Lord was surprised that Estio didn't look like a cactus and said he thought Estio had a mind control ability. Estio inquired about the request, but the Lord interrupted and talked about the cactus again, referring to it as a monster. Ahura got angry, leaped into the air, and stunned the Lord. He then jumped onto the table, and Estio asked if the Lord could hear what Ahura was saying. The Lord confirmed that he could. Estio was amazed by this and asked if the Lord could also control minds. The Lord explained that he couldn't, but mentioned that some connections became stronger through blood. Estio had a sudden realization. He discovered that his blood had the power to make Ahura's thoughts audible. Mubian added that if enough blood was consumed, he wouldn't need to give explicit instructions for every little thing. Estio was amazed that Mubian knew more about his abilities than he did. Mubian explained that years of gathering information had led him to believe that there were others with similar abilities. Suddenly, Mubian drew his sword and shared rumors that the Highgar family might be descended from black dragons. He started to shake and claimed he could feel the essence of the black dragon awakening in his veins. Ahura didn't like his behavior and suggested they leave. Mubian reassured them he was just joking and not a black dragon. Estio inquired about Mubian's request. Mubian handed him a bag and revealed that he wanted to find a real descendant of the black dragons. Estio was surprised by the request, but Mubian explained that it wasn't related to politics. He was simply interested in it. Mubian, who claimed to be the Empire's top swordsman, offered to protect Estio during their mission. Estio asked for the real reason behind Mubian's quest, and Mubian explained that his family had black dragon blood in its ancestry, which gave them extraordinary powers. Estio realized something, but Mubian interrupted, comparing his abilities to those of the cactus Ahura, who objected to the comparison. Mubian asked Estio to choose their first destination. Estio was shocked, but Mubian explained that their goal was to investigate Estio, the one with abilities similar to those of the black dragons mentioned in ancient texts. Estio was confused, but Mubian continued, mentioning that black dragons' natural powers were linked to mental energy and will. Estio's mental domination abilities were too similar to be coincidental, so that was why he invited him to Hygar. Mubian extended his hand for a handshake, and they agreed to a 1-month collaboration. Then, a pink-haired lady appeared, calling out for Mubian. It was revealed that the pink-haired lady was Mubian's mother, who used to tell him stories about having dragon blood as a child. When Mubian asked if those stories were true, his mother confirmed they were, a gift from the noble and beautiful black dragon. Mubian once mentioned that she lied because her grandpa had told her that dragons no longer existed in the world. However, his mother had a different perspective. She thought that although many dragons might have vanished due to the world becoming vast and complex, the dragon that had a connection with their family was believed to remain. The proof of this lay in their family history, where they had produced strong children for generations. Mubian had doubts about the dragon's existence, as he had never seen it himself. His mother reassured him, stating that dragons were eternal guardians who didn't age, fall ill, or die. She particularly praised black dragons as the most noble and beautiful beings, certain that they were watching over their family from a distance. Mubian was skeptical, suggesting that perhaps they were not strong enough for black dragons to care about them. His mother agreed, acknowledging that they paled in comparison to real dragons. Nonetheless, she encouraged them to lead diligent lives and continue their family line, as they might be the last living evidence of dragons in the world. Curious, Mubian asked why the black dragon chose to stay. The answer, according to Jiraiya, was the black dragon's love for humans. Mubian's dream was interrupted when Estio greeted him. Estio asked why Mubian was still awake, to which Mubian explained that he had just woken up. They sat by a cozy fireplace, feeling safe. Mubian questioned whether he had been talking in his sleep, but Estio assured him he hadn't. Mubian observed Estio's calm demeanor, reminiscent of Jiraiya, but quickly dismissed the thought, remembering Jiraiya as a warm and gentle woman, while Estio appeared aloof. When Mubian asked why the protagonist wasn't sleeping, Estio disclosed that he possessed the ability to read the dreams of others, and sometimes dreams entered his mind involuntarily. Mubian inquired if Estio had seen his dream, but Estio found it boring. Mubian shared a bit about his family, explaining that Jiraiya was his father's second wife but was like a real mother to him. Unfortunately, she had passed away, and he felt unable to repay her kindness since he was too young to do anything for her. His birth mother had lost her life shortly after giving birth to him. Mubian was telling a story about a monster invasion. The monsters were hiding in the city and caught Jiraiya. Everyone in the city died that day except for him. If the black dragon still existed in the world, he would like to ask it just one question. Estio looked at Mubian with sadness in his eyes. Mubian lay on the floor, gazing at the stars, and said he would ask the black dragon what he was going to protect now since his mother was gone. He felt sad and thought he didn't need his monstrous strength anymore. Mubian thought that if he had known his mother would die, he would have preferred their bloodline to disappear. Estio interrupted him and advised him to take a rest since useless thoughts start to arise when one doesn't get enough sleep. Estio then assured him that he wouldn't have a nightmare anymore. The next morning, Mubian was woken up by the amazing smell of soup Estio was preparing. He then realized that he had slept soundly, thinking that a mental ability user is truly incredible since he helped him sleep well for the first time in a while. Ahura then teased him, calling him lazy like a sloth. Mubian smiled and said he usually doesn't sleep that much, but Ahura told him to wash his face because it was dirty. Parker came, bringing warm ham, cheese, and corn soup, but Mubian thought it looked terrible and couldn't even remember the name of the soup. Parker said it was the cheese, milk, potato, and broccoli soup, but Mubian yelled at him, saying he had just changed the name. Parker tried to remember the name, so Mubian told him that it didn't matter since it was just a mix of whatever he had. Parker said it wasn't true and he shouldn't ignore his 20 years of cooking experience. Mubian asked how old he was, and Parker said he was 21, meaning he learned how to cook when he was only 1 year old. He exaggerated, saying he made all of his baby food, but Mubian, of course, didn't believe a word of it. Uhuru joined the conversation and said it made sense since avians are closer to birds, so they can fly around pretty well at 1 year old. Parker agreed, adding that he was able to fly from a young age too, which made him a very talented bird. Now, after the respectable job of being a delivery man, he became a capable member of the leader's team. Nubian interrupted his narcissistic monologue and asked Estia where Parker was. Parker just sat there and said nothing, having no idea where he was. He started sweating and said that he told him he'd take a look around the area. Nubian asked if Estio had been gone for a long time, and Parker said he had, but he was the leader, so he'd be fine on his own. Nubian stood up and said he didn't feel good about the land's safety. Parker asked why, and he said it wasn't safe, mentioning that there were many monsters, bandits, and soldiers from enemy kingdoms. He explained that Hygar was a territory that had still not been able to escape the dangers of war. Parker asked if he should go get the leader, but Nubian said he'd do it. He jumped high in the air and suddenly smelled some blood. He saw Estio, and just as he asked if he was all right, Estio turned around, and now they saw the wolves growling at Nubian. He wondered why the wolves were out there, but Estio answered by asking if he had finished preparing to leave already instead. He said he hadn't, since they were still eating breakfast, and then again asked Estio what he was doing with the wolves. Estio explained that they were wolves he had met while in the Renix's underground cave system. He saved them, and now they were loyal. Nubian understood, realizing that the wolf pack might have annoyed Hygar. He knew that the wolves could have been a problem for Hygar, and would have caused trouble. Estio asked why, and Nubian explained that the wolves were predators, and the Renix cave system was the only way for Hygar's people to connect with the outside world. To make it safe for people to pass through there, it made sense to remove dangerous beasts and monsters. Nubian noticed one wolf with blood on its mouth and fur. He asked Estio if he had fed the wolf with his blood, and Estio confirmed he had. He wasn't sure if it would help, but he mentioned a previous case where his blood had healed an injured animal. Nubian considered Estio's actions noble but cautioned him not to give his blood so freely. He explained that if he was a descendant of the Black Dragon, his blood had the power to transform living creatures into guardians. Nubian then apologized for talking too much and said he wouldn't help them anymore, but Estio suggested they could change the wolves. He promised to make sure the wolves wouldn't harm humans again, and Nubian agreed to guarantee them food and safety in Hygar's castle. As they returned, the scent of the partners' food spread throughout the forest. Parker was initially scared of the cave wolves, but Lord Duke Nubian assured him that they were now their allies. Niji noticed that one of the wolves was a baby, and Estio mentioned that it had been hit by an arrow in its back leg. Parker quickly prepared for a surgical operation to remove the arrow. However, he soon realized that there was no injury, and Estio admitted that he had mistakenly thought it was another wolf while concealing an arrow behind his back. Nubian had a feeling that Estio didn't want their party to know about his unique abilities. They all noticed Suki, who was sleeping on a tree branch. Estio informed her that they would be leaving soon. Suki noticed the wolves and Estio mentioned that they would be teaming up with the wolves for the duration of their mission. Suki asked why they were suddenly becoming teammates, and Estio explained that they would also become legal residents within the Hygar territory. Suki didn't seem to care and asked where Estio was heading next. Nubian interrupted their conversation and announced that he had decided on their next destination. He mentioned that he had heard Estio grew up in a village and asked about it. Estio revealed it was Selbia village. Nubian decided to go there, which surprised everyone except Uhuru, who wondered why Nubian was making this choice when he knew Estio didn't like the idea. Nubian had a sly smile, and Uhuru thought he might be up to something. Estio questioned why they were going to Selbia village, and Nubian explained that initially, he wanted to observe Estio, but he realized he didn't know enough about himself either. Meeting his family, the ones who raised him, could provide more information. Estio thought about his angry family members and didn't want to see them again. Eventually, Nubian persuaded him to follow the requester's request, and they set off on their journey. Hawk welcomed Estio to the Gaulesia branch of the Ignis Guild, and called him the guild leader. Our protagonist said there was no need to call him a leader, but Hawk explained that by status, he was now his subordinate. However, Estio insisted on keeping their friendly relationship. Hawk smiled and asked how he'd been lately in a casual manner. Estio was surprised but happy that it was the same Hawk. Hawk started complimenting Estio's clothes and saying he believed in his potential for greatness. He also praised himself, claiming he had a keen eye for people and deserved higher pay for his work. Rosa joined the conversation and interrupted Hawk's self-praise. She had heard that Hawk was on his way to Selbia village in the river region. She mentioned that it was quite far from Gaulesia and would require crossing numerous mountain passes. Rosa suggested that walking all the way there would take a long time and be tough on them. In response, Hawk offered to lend a carriage for a more comfortable ride and proposed taking a break for now. Estio went to his room and noticed that everything was still the same. Soon, he heard a knock on the door. Rosa entered and asked if he knew how to ride a horse. Estio admitted that he didn't. Rosa explained that there were no carriages available, only a few horses. Estio said it was okay because walking wasn't a problem for him. Rosa then offered to send guards with him for safety, but Estio declined, trusting his client, Mubian, who was self-proclaimed to be the strongest swordsman, with his life. Mubian stood there, a little shocked, as he watched Estio call him a self-proclaimed strongest swordsman. Rosa expressed her admiration and wished him good luck. Then, Parker arrived and mentioned that the cooking ingredients were running low, and his pot had burnt and smelled terrible. He suggested getting a new one. Rosa welcomed Parker into the office to arrange the pot exchange. Mubian mentioned his intention to visit the weapon shop, but his statement went unnoticed by everyone. He teased Estio for his lack of knowledge about weapons. Estio explained that he was part of the special support department and didn't need to use a weapon. This surprised Mubian because Estio had grown up in the countryside, so he expected him to have some experience with hunting or handling weapons. Estio revealed that he didn't want to harm animals, but when Mubian asked if he had ever taken a person's life, Estio hesitated before admitting that he had. Mubian wasn't shocked, as Estio gave the impression of someone who wouldn't harm an insect but would do what was necessary to protect a human life. Mubian suggested that, despite their exceptional abilities, it was wise for humans to carry weapons for their safety. He made it a request, and Estio agreed. Ahura asked why Suki was joining them, and Estio explained that she would follow them no matter what. Suki playfully walked around the room, showing her determination. A couple of hours later, Estio and Nubian reached a shop, but the owner informed them that he couldn't sell anything. Viscount Fabian had recently emptied the store because he was recruiting more soldiers but had run out of equipment. The shop owner also mentioned that the Viscount's daughter, Sarah, had fallen seriously ill. Estio looked confused and asked what kind of illness it was. The shop owner leaned forward and explained that there was a rumor that she suffered from some sort of heart illness. Sarah would freak out whenever she saw blood, and on top of that, she had nightmares every night. The fear had only started recently when the soldiers from her house were killed, and she saw the bloodshed. Estio immediately knew it was the incident when he defended himself and had to kill the soldiers. The shop owner continued, saying that Sarah's father always kept some soldiers in the castle to keep her safe and to ease the emptiness in her heart. He was searching for ways to calm her down. Seeing Estio's poker face, the shop owner apologized, thinking he had told a lousy story about the princess, and then asked if he could do anything else for him. Estio calmly asked if he could sharpen his sword, to which the man agreed. He then remembered Sarah's words when she said that if he could read her secrets, they would become secret friends. But Mubian interrupted him and handed him a black dagger. Estio carefully accepted the dagger and asked why he was giving him a weapon. Mubian replied, saying it would be better than nothing, and seriously advised him to take better care of himself. Estio thanked him, and Mubian said they should start going. The streets were half empty, and Suki joined them for a short walk. Estio turned to her and asked if she remembered Sarah, to which Suki sarcastically replied that she didn't remember every single human on Earth. Estio said maybe it was better that she didn't remember, but Suki asked why he was worrying about her when she made his life even more difficult. Estio just clenched his fist and said that Sarah didn't do anything wrong. Back in Estio's guild house, Sarah's father, Viscount Fabian, yelled at Rosa, asking why they rejected his request. She said they didn't reject his request, but the Viscount screamed that he had been waiting for 10 days already. Just at that moment, Estio entered the office and saw the commotion. Rosa attempted to explain that Estio had joined the main headquarters. However, Fabian interrupted her and threatened to shut down the building if she continued. Nubian and Estio simply stood behind Fabian and observed as Rosa apologized. Fabian persisted in asking for Estio, and Nubian quickly realized that it was the rumored Viscount who was talking to Rosa. Nubian then concluded that the Viscount was the one who seemed mentally unstable, not his daughter. He wondered why the Viscount dressed like a homeless man and questioned what happened to his noble dignity. Nubian suggested that they should ignore the Viscount and continue walking. Estio agreed, and as they attempted to do so, the Viscount noticed them and yelled Estio's name. The Viscount looked exhausted and rushed to Estio, mentioning that it had been a while since they had seen each other. He also stated that he heard about Estio's job change and had been waiting for him for a long time. Fabian grabbed Estio's hand, his trembling, and asked if Estio remembered him. He begged Estio to listen, started crying, and shared concerns about his daughter, Sarah's condition. He asked Estio for help in erasing her traumatic memories to stop her nightmares. Estio, with a serious expression, questioned why he should help. Fabian pleaded, and Estio mentioned he was currently working on another request. Fabian was shocked but then became furious, yelling at Nubian and demanding that he cancel the request. Nubian calmly replied that he didn't want to cancel it. Fabian yelled again, but Nubian made it clear he had no intention of canceling the request. The Viscount was enraged and saw Nubian as a childish troublemaker. Nubian smiled and introduced himself as Nubian Hygar. The Viscount's expression completely changed as he realized who he was talking to, and the others in the room were frightened by Nubian's name. Nubian smiled and apologized for his earlier behavior, acknowledging that he had acted rudely as a duke's son. Looking at Fabian directly in the eyes, showing off his mind-reading abilities, just as the Viscount tried to say something, Estio interrupted him. He asked if he still harbored ill feelings towards him because of the incident at his mansion when they tried to capture him and fired at Niju. Fabian said there was no need to make a big deal out of such a minor thing. He indulged in self-pity and added that he had already forgotten all about it. He mentioned that there were more important things to think about. Estio thought to himself that Fabian was always someone who didn't know how to admit his own mistakes and apologize. As he turned to him, Fabian told him it would be the last time he asked for help. He started begging Estio to listen to him, deeply concerned about his daughter's well-being. He grabbed Estio by the shoulders and began shaking him as if he were trying to snap some sense into our protagonist and help save his daughter. Estio took a moment to think, then told him to let go and turned to walk away. As Nubian and Estio were leaving, Fabian believed that it couldn't end like that. So he yelled his daughter's name, fell to his knees, and begged Estio to come to his house, lying and saying that Sarah wanted to see him immediately. Everyone watched Viscount Fabian on his knees, begging Estio to come save his little daughter. After a brief silence, Estio spoke and told him to listen very carefully to what he was about to say. He went on to say that he wouldn't accept anything that the Viscount offered him, and that any decisions regarding the visit to Sarah would be made by himself. Fabian lay on the floor, but Estio didn't care about his posture because he never apologized, not even once. The evening arrived, and Sarah spent some time gazing out the window. Her eyes looked sad and tired due to the nightmares that prevented her from sleeping. Her little dog tried to cheer her up, but it didn't work. Suddenly, she heard scratching sounds under the window. A moment later, she heard a big meow, and Suki was standing at the window. Sarah was surprised and, as she looked into Suki's eyes, she realized they resembled Estio's. Sarah lowered her head and began to speak. She admitted that she had been wrong in her first impression of Estio. When they first met, He was skinny and quiet, not someone she considered funny or interesting. She said he seemed kind of sad and had the ability to read hearts. Sarah thought that if she had such an ability, she'd talk to her dog, Hiru, every day and be very happy. Even though Estio had Niju, his expression remained somewhat blank. There was one positive thing about Estio that Sarah remembered from their first meeting: his beautiful blue eyes. Looking into those eyes had a calming effect on her heart. However, now she wondered why someone with such beautiful and charming eyes could decide to kill someone at that moment. Sarah was very scared and couldn't think clearly. She was terrified by what her brother and father had done. But strangely, she also felt a sense of relief. Even though many soldiers had lost their lives, Estio hadn't hurt her elder brother or father. She was also scared of herself for feeling relieved about it all. As she cried and felt overwhelmed with sadness, she heard a gentle voice reassuring her that it wasn't her fault. When she turned around, she saw Estio standing right behind her. He told her not to blame herself. Then, Suki jumped down and joined them. Sarah asked if it was him. Our protagonist smiled and greeted her with her name. He extended his hand, and Sarah, smiling, corrected him, asking him to call her by her nickname, Sarah. She then asked if he had come because her father, Viscount Fabian, told him about her illness. Estio said it had nothing to do with him. At first, she didn't understand why he had come to visit her. Estio reminded her that the last time they talked, she said they were friends. This made Sarah happy, and she agreed that they were secret friends. Estio assured her that as a friend, he had no intention of hurting her or her family. He then mentioned that he would erase her memories. Sarah's expression changed, and she became scared and confused. She asked what he meant, but Estio gently put his hand on her head and told her not to be afraid. He explained that erasing her memories was something that needed to be done. Sarah swiftly slapped Estio's hand and shouted at him, leaving him somewhat startled. He read her thoughts and explained that she used to have only negative thoughts in her head. He said if she could forget everything related to him, she'd be able to smile again. Sarah grew very angry and grabbed Estio by his robe. She declared that she didn't want to avoid things she disliked, as that felt like a cowardly way to approach life, and she was no coward. She even asked if that's what adults do. Estio remained calm and composed, reassuring her that it wasn't what he meant. Sarah called him a dummy for scaring her, and she mentioned that forgetting the emotions she felt at that moment seemed scarier than a never-ending nightmare. She also expressed her fear that she might unknowingly hurt people and just laugh without realizing she was doing wrong, much like her father, Viscount Fabian. Sarah then lifted her adorable puppy, Hiro, and told Estio that she didn't want to forget him, as it would mean forgetting Hiro too. She hugged her puppy tightly and said she never wanted that to happen. Estio asked her what she wanted to do instead, and Sarah, now smiling, said she wanted to be his friend. She believed that being friends with him would be enough, and she'd figure everything else out on her own. Estio asked if she was telling the truth, and she confirmed that she was. She added that she was Sarah, after all. With a serious expression, she told Estio never to erase her memories, and he said he understood. Before leaving, Estio assured her that she would do well. He jumped out of the window, and Sarah saw some magical feathers in the air. Looking down, she realized that Estio had many friends already. That night, Suki, Mubian, Estio, and Parker returned to the guild. At one point, Estio suddenly stopped and turned toward his crew, asking them how they knew he was at Fabian's mansion. Parker just scratched his head and said that Mubian had dragged him along, while Mubian explained that he had followed him quietly and saw where he was going. Estio thought to himself that it was best to stop talking and thinking around Mubian. As they approached the guild house, they saw Niju calling Estio's name and announcing that dinner was ready just in time. Ahuru was there too, jumping with happiness. Mubian, still hugging Estio, mentioned that he was getting hungry and it would be a good idea to eat some food because they'd be leaving tomorrow morning. Estio looked at the sky and realized he'd be back in his birthplace, Selbia, by the next day. He was getting anxious about speaking the next words, making Ahura frustrated because of the suspense. Parker was not sure about what he saw, but he told them that someone was tied to the burning pillar. This news visibly shocked Estio, and he panicked, asking Parker if he meant the villagers had lit a pillar on fire with someone bound to it. Parker confirmed it, adding that the person tied up was still alive. Everyone fell silent. Parker returned with some news, confirming that it wasn't a mountain fire for now, which they assumed. Estio then realized something and asked what Parker meant by "for now," and Parker explained that the villagers had constructed a burning pillar, an altar. Estio defended Bella, saying she had never killed anyone, which greatly angered his older brother. Estio tried to calm the situation down and explained that he had just read Bella's memories a few moments ago. In her memories, there was no scene in which she ate someone's liver or killed a person. Bella stood behind him, confirming that it was the truth, and that she was definitely innocent. The main character calmly asked if there was any proof of what they were saying or if the judgment had been fair. But Rosette laughed in their face, saying, "Why would we need something like that? Everyone says she's a witch, so it must be true." Then Estio's older brother Terry stepped forward and declared that only an evil person would protect a supposed sinner. He called Estio a cursed child and said it would be better if Estio just disappeared without a trace and never came back to the village. It was an awkward situation. Niji got excited when she heard about water-controlling abilities, and Nubian explained that magicians could draw water from nearby sources, while elementalists could create rain clouds. In other words, they could easily put out the fire in a few minutes. Back at Estio's house, the grandpa showed great excitement about Estio joining the Ignis Guild. He sat between our protagonist's parents and mentioned that their village had produced an incredible person. Estio was in disbelief as he listened to these words. He realized that if Estio never willingly talked about his family, then there must be something wrong. But there's no way they would have mistreated someone with abilities as powerful as his. Suddenly, flames could be heard and a lot of smoke could be seen in the distance. It seemed to be coming from the direction of Estio's village. Parker quickly flew into the air to check out the situation. Nubian asked if it might be a mountain fire, but Estio mentioned it was right where the village was. The old man started to stammer and noted that it had been a while since Estio had seen his family, then quickly greeted him. However, no one paid much attention to the greeting. The grandpa continued praising Estio, calling him great and reminiscing about the old days when Estio was a little boy. Estio's father awkwardly chuckled, making the situation even more uncomfortable. Niju, on the other hand, was concerned about the villagers' lives. Nubian chimed in, explaining that when a fire spreads like that in a remote mountain village, it's hard to deal with, especially since they lacked a water-manipulating ability user. Nubian then asked if that meant the village was on fire, but Estio just shrugged and claimed that he didn't know. This left Nubian feeling a bit confused, as he didn't sense much urgency from our protagonist. Estio thought to himself how funny it was that there was a talking monkey, a guy rumored to have the blood of the black dragon in him, and a talking chicken. Yet they still called him a monster. Ahura jumped into Estio's arms and complained about everyone ignoring him. Estio explained that they weren't ignoring him, they were afraid of him. He found it incredible that he could instill fear in so many people. Ahura agreed and said that if you put it that way, he's pretty cool. Niju chimed in, agreeing, and Parker joined, mentioning that he might be considered a monster since he's not a human but a winged avian. Lastly, Ahura started speaking, and Estio's family got scared of hearing a cactus talk. Rosette immediately called Ahura a monster and fainted. Her words and fainting insulted Ahura, and he asked her to stop pretending to be unconscious. But she had actually fallen unconscious for real. Some half an hour later, Nubian said that everyone must be happy to see him. But Estio didn't answer the question, which made Parker realize that Estio was not happy at all, even after returning home as the guild leader. Estio told Parker that his family probably still lived there. Nubian added that his parents were fine and said he was the youngest brother, with one older brother and one older sister. He thought to himself how he had done some research after all. Nubian grew tired of the fake praise for Estio and bluntly informed them that Estio had returned not because he missed his family, but because he had been ordered to do so. Estio's grandpa scolded Nubian for rudely interrupting the adults' conversation. Nubian sipped his tea and asked for an original response. Estio turned around and asked what Parker meant by that. Parker clarified that leaving the place you grow up in can be hard for adults, even if it's to chase their dreams. Our protagonist said it was not at all what happened in his case. It was definitely not because of something like responsibility. He clenched his fist and said that he only left because he wanted to live. Nubian, Niju, and the rest of the crew looked at themselves in silence, not knowing the struggles he went through. Estio's father inquired if Nubian was a noble, and Nubian happily poured a handful of gold coins onto the table. Estio's family marveled at the shiny coins, and Nubian revealed he would give them all the coins if they answered his questions well. The grandpa stood up and called Nubian a lord, while Estio's mom mentioned that she had sensed something unique about him, as if he exuded an elegant charm. Nubian explained that it wasn't honey but a special perfume given to him by the emperor, which he used for his foot massages. Estio had flashbacks of his family members calling him ugly names and telling him to go away. People in the village said he must be a cursed child, and it made Estio feel terrible. His depressing thoughts were interrupted by Parker praising Estio's sense of responsibility, considering how he started working as soon as he became an adult. Nubian asked them if they were Estio's real family. Estio's parents exchanged glances and then, hesitating, admitted that they were Estio's parents. His mother got up quickly and started to affectionately pat her beloved son, calling him their precious baby. Nubian was skeptical and stood up, warning them that if they were lying about Estio's bloodline, a severe punishment would await them, so they should tell the truth. His mother insisted, pointing out how much Estio resembled the rest of the family. They continued to praise Nubian, but he secretly thought less of them, as he had expected more from the people Estio had grown up with. The grandpa confessed that he wasn't sure what he could tell Nubian that he didn't already know. Nubian humorously remarked that he would have never guessed that Estio's family was so clueless if he hadn't known they were the leader's family. He suggested they cut the nonsense and get to the point, stating that even the least informed individuals could answer questions about their own experiences. A few minutes later, Parker mentioned that a person wouldn't get robbed in a place like where they were walking. Nubian responded, saying that you can't rob if there are no people around. Parker couldn't help but ask our protagonist how long it had been since he had returned to his hometown. Estio replied, saying he had left the village at the beginning of the year. Parker noted that he basically left after his coming-of-age ceremony. Estio, without showing any anger, grabbed Terry's hand and told him that he had also hated Terry for a long time. Terry clenched his teeth and tried to hit his younger brother, but their father stepped in front of Estio, taking the blow instead. Terry was shocked, but their father told him that they didn't have to get along, but Estio was still his brother, after all. Surprisingly, Terry accused his father of favoring Estio, and their father admitted that he had been afraid but never truly hated him. Estio was confused and put his hand on his father's back. At that moment, a bright light appeared, surprising Estio. Estio tried to recall what they had read at that time, but they couldn't. Parker became worried about Estio because they suddenly seemed sad. Nija also expressed concern, but Estio assured her that they were fine. Estio then looked at their parents, and became convinced that they were hiding something. Our protagonist stood up and approached their parents, asking if they were willing to let them delve into their memories to confirm the truth. His mother had screamed, telling him he couldn't read their thoughts. She insisted that reading people's thoughts would turn him into a monster. Then, with a loud slam, Estio hit the table so hard that it split in two. He yelled at his parents to stop talking about monster nonsense. Someone threatened his parents, saying that all that talk about monsters would make the monsters feel bad. Morning came, and their journey continued. Ahura walked a bit behind everyone else, yawning and complaining about his sore roots. Niju saw him struggling and offered to carry him, which Ahura happily accepted. However, as soon as Estio glanced at their parents, they were flooded with memories of the times when they were punished for reading people's thoughts, and were called a monster for doing so. Their mother covered Estio's mouth with her hand and threatened to disown them if they ever invaded someone's thoughts again. He mentioned it must be quite isolated, being so deep in the mountain, and Estio added that now, thinking about it, he had lived in a really remote place. Estio's father tried to stop Terry from bullying him, but Terry kept on bullying him. Terry said Estio shouldn't survive in the attic because it was as cold as a freezer, and they only fed him once a month. Terry called him a cockroach and shouted that only a monster could survive in those conditions. The parents were shocked to hear these words, but Terry continued with insults. He said he hated Estio and accused him of pretending to be a part of the family just because he had the same eye color as their mother. Meanwhile, Nubian observed quietly and wondered what Terry meant by saying Estio was copying their mother's eye color. Estio led the group because he knew the way to his village, Selbia. Walking uphill made Parker quite tired, and Nubian complained too, saying they had come a long way but still couldn't see the village. Still standing and being very serious, Estio told his family members to cooperate if they wanted the gold. Nubian showed them, and Estio's brother grabbed his robe and asked who he was threatening. Then, he mentioned that they had to live in humiliation from the village because of him, and get stoned and cursed at just because of him. Still yelling, he added that he had sent him to the attic to stop seeing him. They all remembered the cold attic Estio had slept in as a kid. Nubian then asked Estio's siblings if they remembered Estio's birth, but his older brother said he didn't. Their father tried to persuade Nubian that the children were too young to remember, but Nubian crossed his arms and stated that he remembered everything he had seen and heard since he was 1 year old. Nubian then turned to Estio and inquired if they were being honest. When Estio asked why he was asking such a question, Nubian explained that Estio had the ability to determine if someone was lying, and if not, he would order them to read their minds. As the heat increased, Bella continued to cry out for someone to save her. Suddenly, Suki appeared on top of the stake. People recognized that a black cat's presence indicated that the girl was a witch. Suki looked at Bella calmly, and Bella thought Suki's eyes resembled Estio's eyes. She realized that it was all because of him. If Estio hadn't left the town, he would be in her position now. As she thought about various possible scenarios, the ropes binding her to the stake were suddenly cut. The onlookers were shocked to see her free. Estio appeared before Bella, holding a knife that Nubian had given him. It had proven to be quite useful. Estio lifted Bella and slowly walked away, leaving the fiery inferno behind. His face showed no emotion, but he was secretly disgusted by the people of Selbia village. Estio simply ignored Bella and continued walking. Bella, feeling disheartened, knelt on the ground, then became distraught and asked why Estio was behaving that way. She began to cry, and her sobs echoed throughout the village. Nubian interrupted her monologue, asking Estio if he was really going to listen to her rambling. Estio firmly stated that he wouldn't, and urged Nubian to continue. Despite this, Bella remained persistent, wanting to talk about the days when they were young and were friends. However, later on, one of the villagers who had expressed his love to Bella accused her of bewitching him. He saw her in the streets, yelled at her, calling her a witch and endangering her life. Now, tied up and about to be burned alive, she yelled, saying that he had claimed to love her. Estio was a bit taken aback and told her that she still despised him. He added that if she could, she would throw him into the fire pit she had just been in. Bella screamed that it wasn't true, but Estio gently removed her hand from his coat and explained that he wasn't so kind as to accept someone who found him repulsive. He told her that after he finished his task, he hoped to never see her again, as both she and the whole town were very tiresome for him. Estio stopped beside a tree, and what he saw next truly shocked him. Bella was tied up, and the flames were all around her, but she was still alive. She sobbed and begged for someone to save her, insisting she wasn't like that. Her brothers, Dino and Louis, just looked away. Bella called for Jake to help her, but his wife yelled at her to keep her husband's name out of her mouth. Bella then had flashbacks of her parents who never treated her well, but she longed for them to be by her side. She remembered when a group of kids asked her to play with them, and when she joined them, they treated her like family, even calling her their little sister. It was the first time she felt loved, and she was very, very happy. Bella didn't give up, though. She stood in the rain and told Estio that back in the day, she didn't know him properly, and only believed what others said about him. Now, she understood that it wasn't true, and that they were alike in many ways. She tried to express that they had both been abandoned. Estio knew that if they truly were evil, it would be him tied up like that if he had stayed in the village a few months ago. Now, he saw smoke rising from the middle of the village, but, as Parker had described, the village itself was not burning, and there was no immediate danger. Estio just stood there with his head hurting and blood dripping on his boots. Bella informed him about the blood on his forehead, and Estio just chuckled, thinking to himself how his village, Selbia, hadn't really changed at all. He then angrily gazed at the crowd and yelled, "Stop!" In an instant, every single person around him fell to their knees, unable to move, accusing Estio of placing a curse on them. As they moved away from the flames, Estio asked his father for an explanation. His father clenched his teeth and angrily revealed that the girl he had just rescued was considered a sinner. She had committed a grave sin that had enraged everyone, and they believed she should pay for it with her life. His father approached to see what was happening and couldn't believe his eyes when he noticed the Ignis Guild badge on Estio's uniform. The sky became cloudy, mirroring the tense atmosphere in the village. The villagers protested, suggesting that Estio might be lying. Estio's father threw a rock, hitting him in the head, and then shouted at the top of his lungs, telling our protagonist to leave the village and calling him a monster. He even called him a fool. Then, suddenly, the rain started falling. Estio had bitten his lower lip in frustration, thinking there was no way Parker had seen it correctly. He believed the Birdman must have seen it wrong. He started running towards the village, and while he ran, he considered that even the villagers wouldn't go that far. They could be mean at times, but they weren't people who would commit evil deeds. Estio inquired about the sin Bella had committed, but Rosette, Estio's older sister, interrupted him. She claimed that Bella had bewitched a man from a neighboring town and had killed him. She even accused Estio of saving a murderer. Bella vehemently protested, screaming that she was not a murderer. Estio's brother, Terriot, used to call him a wicked fool. One day, as Estio looked up, he suddenly noticed feathers floating in the air. It was then that Parker, Mubian, and their crew finally arrived. Mubian calmly asked Terriot where his manners were, for speaking to the leader of the Ignis Guild in such a disrespectful way. Rosette, now on her knees, asked if he was talking about the famous Ignis Guild. Estio's father then chimed in, saying it wasn't the right weather to leave guests standing outside. He offered to lead the members of the Ignis Guild to his house. They began to follow him, and Bella rushed to Estio, calling him her brother and thanking him for saving her. Estio clarified that he wasn't trying to save her, but Bella insisted that despite his cold demeanor, she knew he was a kind person. Nevertheless, Rosette continued her accusations, claiming that Bella was a witch who had committed adultery with all the men in the town and had killed those who fell for her. To make matters worse, she said Bella had consumed their livers. Someone in the crowd even exclaimed that they had heard she liked to eat organs fresh from the body. The crowd was both angry and fearful, with everyone agreeing that Bella needed to be eliminated. That concludes part 2 of this recap. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. What will happen next? If you would like to see a part 3 of this manhwa, let us know in the comments section below. Till next time.